Morning, everyone. Make sure you sit where you can see the slides. At any rate, you have the notes. I thank you for coming, including those of us who did not sign up, who have now taken the files and notes of those who did sign up, and who are not here yet. They're going to be surprised. And I think let Pastor Danny deal with the conflicts outside the door. It reminded me that I have not signed up for the Saturday, the 3rd of February's Genesis 1 to 11. Make sure you sign up for that. Because I think that is the more difficult, definitely the more challenging part of understanding the book of Genesis. And we have the privilege of a professor who has written books on the Old Testament to share with us. So don't miss that one. Cancel all your other appointments and make sure you sign up. Okay, this is what we will attempt to cover this morning. We will have a break at about, according to the timing I have, at about 10:30. And then we will come back and we will attempt to close at 12 noon sharp, so that you can go on to your other activities. If we come back later than what we have planned for the break, then we'll just take 5 minutes, maybe 5 at most. I don't think even 10 minutes more, okay? So you have an idea how the day will go. So at 10:30 we will have a break. Just some words before we launch into the seminar itself. There are many ways to do an overview of these chapters. And I've chosen a certain way. And I want to tell you at the start why this is so that later on you appreciate why I did not cover certain things and why I more or less elaborate on certain things which you would not normally find in a typical survey of Genesis 12 to 15. Number one, I tend to provide covering of material which I think an individual sermon will not highlight. The reason is because a sermon only has that amount of space and time. And the sermons tend to focus on the teaching, the devotional bits of a passage, which is as it should be. Then in the process, sometimes, because you will notice in Genesis that the narratives are connected, and they're connected to a bigger picture, and we can get lost in that bigger picture. It's just like in our lives. God has a major purpose for our lives. So we are every day caught up with the day-to-day things. And then we lose the big picture. So I try to do that. And hopefully it works for you all, and for you especially who are leading Bible studies, because you must keep that big picture in mind. Number two, I would focus on that, and I would also attempt to link the material to our theme for this year, which is blessed to be a blessing. That theme is a very wonderful one especially for us in the 60th anniversary of our church. So I'll attempt to do that, and that is in line with the passages that we are studying this year. But of course, again, it is not something that you would find like in a typical text. So I try to do those two things. In the process, I leave out certain things, of course. That is the privilege of the teacher to select. And of course, you select wrongly, people get upset, etc. I came to hear this. I have a contingency. You can ask Dr. Seah 2 Saturdays from now. He truly is the expert on the Old Testament. So with that, let's just glance at what we will cover. You have the notes, and we are covering these aspects, beginning with what normally we would or should cover when we look at a book. and then into the themes and what I will be focusing on, the faith of the patriarchs, the covenant, and blessed to be a blessing. And then I include some appendices, which I think would or should be helpful to you. Okay, so shall we begin? Those of you at the side, if you can't see well, you just move towards the center. All right. Okay, let's begin with something light-hearted. How many of you are Snoopy fans here? Oh, so eagerly put up your hand. I know one of our pastors is an ardent fan of Snoopy, so I chose this to amuse him. And some of you, I hope. Now, last time we had a seminar, the book of Romans, I asked questions that had only one correct answer. And then everybody looked down at the page and scratched their head. Now I'm asking you open-ended questions. It means there isn't only one correct answer to the question. Okay, it's open. So I hope that you will be open and then you will suggest, what kind of story can we expect? Snoopy loves to think that he is a great writer, and then he starts on his typewriter with, "It was a dark and stormy night." What kind of story would you expect from him? Horror. Yeah, horror. Yes. Thriller. Yes. Hello, this corner. Will. Sorry? A good story, yes. You are intrigued, right? It was a dark and stormy night. What else? There isn't one right answer I'm looking for. Anything else? You think it'll be interesting? No? Okay, the point is this. The opener of a story is supposed to pick us, supposed to intrigue us and get us to read on. And then it also gives us a suggestion of what we expect. Very important. What about the book of Genesis? The first statement in the scripture, in the opening of this book, the book opens with, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So what kind of book can we expect? Creation, yes. Creation, this is something which people puzzle about and people argue over. Yeah, what else? Sorry? God. God is there. Yes, it's about God. In the beginning, God. History. Exactly. It is about history. This is from history teacher. You want to know the past, way past, how this earth came about, the heavens? You know at least one thing. There is someone, there is a being behind it, right? God. Does it tell us anything about God? Does it tell us anything about God? What? God is powerful. What else? In the beginning, He was there. And we are not told how God Himself began. There are many stories, myths, legends, especially in ancient history, that attempt to explain how gods came about. And sometimes gods come from the earth when there was some kind of major cataclysmic happening, and then God emerged, and then He took over, and then He created more havoc, sometimes in many cases. And people say, yeah, so now I understand. What else about this statement? God is the creator. There is a beginning of things. God is behind that beginning. The heavens and the earth, they nearly cover everything. So you see the significance, the magnificence of this statement, which sometimes, we just skirt over because we don't pause and think, with a statement like that in a book, what can we expect from the book and the rest of the books? So those of you who love literature, I'm sure you love some of the opening statements of books, which have become like classic statements, and people quote and use in other contexts. All right, so this is what kind of book we can expect. It's a book that ranges far and wide And it's a book about God, the Creator. Okay? So it's not just about Genesis, that is also the prelude to the rest, or the prologue to the rest of the Bible. Let's just go to some of these things, because if you and we have studied the book of Genesis, by the end of the year, at least some basic things we should know and note, because they're also quite interesting. The title of the book, you say, oh my goodness, let's skip that, I mean, yeah, it's a book called Genesis, we know that. But it's quite interesting when you look at how the name of the book came about. It's a very apt title, how the title of the book came about. In the Hebrew Bible, and of course, our scripture in English and all the rest translated into all the languages of the world, etc., they are translated from the Greek translated from the Hebrew. In the Hebrew Bible, the book's name is In the Beginning. Hebrew language is very interesting. Whereas we need 3-4 words, Hebrew language uses just one word. And that is the beauty and also the complexity of the language, which is very difficult for beginning students. The word is Bereshit. Ber is actually in, okay, and in the beginning. So this word, in the beginning, is actually the first word in the Hebrew Bible of the book. And in Hebrew custom, and not just Hebrew custom, actually the custom of the ancient books, all the books are named by the first word of the book. Isn't that strange? Take a geography book, then you expect the name should be the first word, whatever that first word is. So when I read this and I tried to understand why. You know why? There are some trivials that I slipped into the seminar, because some of you know so much, so I got nothing more to tell you. I'll tell you some trivials. I mean, seriously, okay? But not trivial. It's actually very interesting. In those days, books were written on parchments. Parchments were rolled up, right? And when parchments are rolled up, how are they stored? They're not filed like our library books, one like that, isn't it? They are put in a stack, the scrolls. So you don't have a spine to say, what is this book? How do you search for your books? I go to my stack, I go to my shelf and I look for the type. You can't see that. So what you do? You turn the scroll, you see the first word. That is the book. You paying attention? Sorry, I won't repeat. Because it's a trivial. You understand? So the scrolls are stacked up. When you turn, see Bereshit, in the beginning. That's the book I'm looking for. Genesis, you take it out. Because that's how you get the dog-eared corner. We're going to keep turning to find. How else are you going to search for a book? So this is why the books were named after the first word. And then you say, what's the first word? It's the. In ancient times, like in the case of Genesis, you can see, they don't start with the like that, because the language doesn't work like that. Okay? So this is the name of the book. The book is called In the Beginning. So, but we don't have this name of the book, because when the Hebrew scriptures were translated, they were translated at a time when Greek, even the Jews, spoke Greek, because Greek was the universal language. It's like now English, maybe in some years Chinese, universal language. You don't know English, you are not up in. In those days, Greek was the universal language at the time when Alexander the Great had so much power and influence over that part of the world, Europe, North Africa, etc. So the book had to be translated into Greek. Now, sometimes you do see this, and I hope by now you know, the Septuagint, it's called the Septuagint, is abbreviated LXX, which stands for the number 70. It was translated in this year, about 250 BCE. When it was translated, they had to look for a translation for a title of the book. At that point, they translated the title of the book into Genesis. So Genesis, in fact, is a word that comes from the Greek word, Genesios, right? Genesis. And it was a very apt title, because Genesis means origins. The genesis of how this incident came about was when the beginning of how this came about. So Genesis became the name of the book. Very apt title. So at least we know a few things, and we know that the title of the book should, as far as possible, point to the content. That is very helpful, right? And so this book, frankly, had a very apt title. So Genesis, origins or beginnings, this is the book of beginnings. Genesis records 9 beginnings. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All your expectation, what else did God do? What else began? What else had God behind it, controlling it, overseeing it? The book of beginnings. So these 9 beginnings, you will notice that the beginnings of all these things are the things that philosophers, scholars, thinking people are puzzled about. How did our human race come to be like that? How did we appear? We evolved from the orang-utans, is it? And so on and so forth. All these things. Civilization. How civilization became godless. What was the problem? Etc. All these beginnings, up to chapter 11, the beginning of human languages, the beginning of different groups, people groups, different cultures, all these recorded first 11 chapters. And these first 11 chapters, very, very intense, very, very packed, very difficult to unpack. That's why I said you have to come 3rd of February, okay? Dr. Seah will deal with all these things. And I would say again, I highly recommend that you come. And personally, I'm looking forward to it. We are looking at the beginning of the Hebrew race, the covenant people, chapter 11, verse 10. It starts there. There's a link. Chapter 12 has a link back to chapter 11, because I will point out to you that, in fact, Genesis is a beautifully constructed narrative. And it's a pity we just go around. We never even analyzed the book properly. It's a link back and then on to chapter 50. The beginnings. Note, God transcends. God is above all these beginnings. It begins with, in the beginning, God. There is no Genesis Theou. Theou is Greek for God. Or rather, Theos is the Greek for God. No? Theou is the genitive of Theos. The point is, there is no beginning of God. God transcends all this. God alone, no beginning. And of course, as we study the scriptures and as we know, no end. There is no end. He's the Alpha and the Omega. So on this is based the foundations of our faith and of our beliefs and of our religion. Authorship. Now, authorship is something that sometimes, people will say, sometimes people say things like that also. Oh, let's skip it, because we know who the author is. But seriously, not such a simple matter. Somebody may come to you and say, hey, you're studying Genesis, right? You tell me, what about this, And then you are stumped. Then you say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect my faith. It's true, many of these things that we will talk about, it doesn't affect our faith. But I would say, seriously, we should pay some attention to some of these things which people debate, etc. We should not put them aside like as though, it's just some of it is just what I choose to believe. It doesn't matter. Because our Bible is not a book of science. It has a lot of geography, but it's not a book of geography either. But it is an authentic book with authentic facts, with authentic literature. So we should ask, who authored this book? All right, so who is the author in your mind? The author of the book of Genesis is Moses. Who told you that? Correct. Sunday Bible School. See, the younger ones, you don't know. We were taught author of the book is Moses, and in fact, Moses is not just author of Genesis, he's the author of the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, right? So we said, yes. Do you know, for 2,000 years, everyone, all shades and colors of Christians and scholars, all believe Moses, even though it is never mentioned in the book of Genesis that Moses is the author. Never. Traditionally, for 2,000 years, we believe that. And then, that was thrown out of the window, and it shook the Christian community. In the 70s, that is like 40 years ago, when I first graduated, I went to study theology on my own. With a few others, including our dear sister Choo, we survived, the 2 of us. And when I studied theology at that time, the college I was studying with, which is in Australia, turned liberal. And a lot of people pulled out. Or they could not pass the exam. They could not pass the exam because your answers must reflect liberal views. And one of the things I had to study is that do not think that Moses is the author of Genesis. I think in my head, but when I answer, I have to reflect other opinions. If not, they will just put a big cross, fail. So it's very interesting. But the pendulum has moved again. Okay? So I'd like to give you some background to all this, because even if you are not into all this, you should understand that in the background, there are battles being fought about who God is, about what the scripture is all about, what we can learn from it, how do we view it, etc., etc. Traditionally, as I said, for 2,000 years, until this period, the view was firmly Moses is the author. Come 18th, 19th century, and of course, 18th century, 19th century, those of you who study these epochs or eras, you will know this was the time of the so-called Enlightenment. People were re-examining a lot of things. And no surprises, a lot of these scholars who started to re-examine things, they come from Germany. After we have gone through study about the Reformation, we don't see him that way. The first rebel, German, right? Martin Luther. So it's not a surprise. I don't call him a rebel. I thought of him as some kind of saint, as an aside for which I kept failing church history when I was studying theology. Because when I wrote about Martin Luther, it was very glowing. And the liberals think of him as a rogue. So until I realized that, then I added a few mistakes that he made. Otherwise, cannot pass. See what we have to do? All right, so especially I point out this person because if you pick up a book, for example, there's a book that is recommended for you to buy if you want to buy a very serious scholarly book. Bruce Waltke's book on Genesis. Some of you have bought, right? Well, some of you really spend money on your studies, which is very good. You are going to come across these things. So I tell you in a nutshell. So scholars like Julius Van Heusen, a German, he postulated, he hypothesized. He had this hypothesis when he studied, and of course when you say study, you're not studying in English or German. You're studying the original Hebrew. Okay, so these are very brilliant people. First they master the language, then they look at it and they say, well, the Pentateuch, not just Genesis, but since we're focusing on Genesis, can take Genesis as an example, is a book put together by different people. We don't know who they are, doesn't matter. But if you deconstruct the book, you'll find that the book actually is made up of material from different sources. Okay, and then he names the source documents, he explains why it's like that, and people took up that view. And so this theory puts the authorship of Genesis 1,000 years after Moses. Because Moses is very simply round about 1,500 BC. This theory is about the book being constructed about 400 BC. 400 BC, those of you who know church history, or history of Old Testament, you know that that is post-exilic, post the exile. So the people like Van Housen is saying that post the exile, people came back and said, why did we go to exile? Because we neglected certain things, we forgot certain things, we lost certain things, good thing, we didn't lose it all, let's put it together. Let's now have a proper record. And so they did all these things. And this theory is quite compelling when you look at it because etc., etc. And in fact, I would say that at one time, our Bible colleges in Singapore were all into this, meaning to say this, they teach this as the major position. You understand? This is one of the things that people are debating about. They teach it as a major position, which of course is an issue. So in fact, churches in Singapore, maybe not Bible church so much, but certainly the Bible colleges. Of course, long and short of it is that now, nearly 100 years later, nearly 100 years later, these theories themselves are no longer held as the, if you like, the correct understanding of how Genesis and the rest of the Pentateuch came to be authored. Because the theories themselves have a lot of self-contradiction, the method is not very sound, and it just cannot stand up to scrutiny. Meaning to say, when you really look closely and you challenge it, it will fall apart. As with other kinds of theories, etc., they take the things that support their position, the things which do not support their position, they conveniently park them aside. All right? So all these things are the things that rage. And I would say right now, it is not like that is the dominant. That is the dominant, or in fact, the only correct or intellectually correct understanding of who authored Moses. So let me point out, just to close this part of the argument, we are standing on Moses being the author, okay, of the book of Genesis, and not just the book of Genesis, the Pentateuch, all the first 5 books of the Bible. Why? See how God in his plan prepared a simple Hebrew boy to be so well schooled that he can write those 5 books and can write law in legal language. You know the story, yeah? Now in this session, I assume you know Genesis. You're like, who's Jacob? Oh, you never tell me, huh? Oh, you mean his father's Abraham? I'm so sorry, yeah? You have to, this is wrong time to ask this question, okay? I don't think so. I think most of you know the stories of Genesis very well. So I'll take it you know the story of Moses, which is not in Genesis, in the book of Exodus, that he was brought up in Pharaoh's court. Like the time when King Herod tried to kill all the baby boys around the birth of Jesus, Pharaoh tried to control the population of the Hebrew slaves by ordering the killing of all the boys, baby boys born. You just get rid of one generation, and then it will have repercussions. But Moses was saved. The courage of the midwives, the faith of the midwives, the mother, and so he was picked up and he floated down in this basket down the Nile by a princess in Pharaoh's court. He was brought up in Pharaoh's court, like one of the Egyptian princes. He had the capability, the ability, the training. So he was like nearly trained in the Harvard of those days. Because in those days, you don't go to university. Yeah? The princes will be raised to have all that kind of knowledge and that kind of ability. The Pentateuch itself, though not the book of Genesis, claims that Moses wrote it. So I give you some references there. Then you say, okay, the books, these books claim it, Exodus, Numbers, whatever, claim it, then, but not Genesis. The point is this: the Pentateuch, the 5 books, are always referred together as the law of Moses. Right from earlier days, right from the days before Christianity, it's called the law of Moses. That's how it's referred to. So the 5 are taken together and they're all attributed to Moses. So there's no reason to say, yeah, the law of Moses, but you know, this book we must take out, not written by Moses, only the rest. There's no reason to do that. No? That would be very artificial. Jesus himself, very powerful, Jesus himself claimed that Moses wrote about him. Where did Jesus write about him? Jesus was referring to certain passages. Because you must remember that these things do not exist in a vacuum. When Jesus is referring to certain things, there was already in Judaistic thought, there's already in the thoughts of the Jews at that time, that these are passages pointing to the Messiah. It doesn't say there exactly Jesus, his name is Jesus, born in a manger, no. But the Jews understood that as messianic or messianic passages. Okay? And these passages are in Genesis. And Jesus said, Moses wrote about me. It was also indicating to the people, he is the Messiah they are looking for. And of course, they rejected it. Moses wrote about him. So, authorship, there are very strong reasons to accept that Moses is the author of Genesis. And once you accept that, you can also, because once you accept who the author is, certain other things also fall into place. That is the point. Okay? But we have still got a problem. Even if you accept, oh yeah, Moses wrote it, you still have a problem because Moses was born 300 years after the history of Genesis ends. 300 years is a very long time, you know. So Moses, what's the year for Moses? The year for Moses is 1,500. The year for Abraham is 2,000. That's those of you who came for the history of the survey of Old Testament. We learned that, right? We learned Abraham, Moses, David. So there is a number of years, 300 years separating end of Genesis and Moses. So how can Moses write something? He was not there 300 years ago. It's not a problem. People are writing about things in ancient Greece. How did they write? Were they there? They were not there. How did they write? They used reference materials. They go to the library. Was there a library then? There were libraries. Although you can't read the books look like this. They're very heavy to carry. They're written in Braille. But there was library. And because it's so laborious and so expensive to keep such a library, you can bet only most important things are written down. Suppose including important recipes, those of you. Right, the point is this, the point is that there is a library. Not just that there is a library and that people will preserve and save all the resources for preserving the most important things about themselves and about their situation, there is. But, hello, you must have access. I remember that when Beng Chue and I were struggling theological students, by the way, we were doing that while holding full-time jobs, etc. We had no library access. So we had to pray very hard until we got access to the Trinity Theological College library. Graciously, they let us use it. It's just no way. Moses had access. He had access to the best library in the world. He was in Egypt. He was roaming around. He was playing in the library probably as a little toddler. The point is this. You see how God works? But it's not just the recorded form which you have to master in order to read. There are two aspects of history which are passed down. History is passed down through memorization. And that is why a lot of history come down in poem and song, because those are easier to remember. And you notice now, more and more, I think the younger ones, nothing against the methods that you use, but the older ones tend to have better memory. Okay, until they get a little bit demented. And when they are a little bit off, they still remember things long ago. It's amazing. If I go out with my mother to help her with the shopping, we forgot something. She got 12, 15 items. She doesn't have iPhone to record. She doesn't carry on piece of paper, tick, run here. She keeps it in her head. They rely on memory. You understand? When you rely on something, you will strengthen it. So it is not a surprise. It's a surprise to us. How can we, how can we remember all these things? They remember. No doubt when they remember certain stories, sometimes when they tell, they add a little bit of sugar and spice and chili powder, no doubt. You understand? But the main story will be that. They don't suddenly change the hero and substitute their favorite cartoon character. They don't do that. You understand? But they may add little bits of details here and there because they have to communicate. They have to make it interesting. Right. So there are two aspects of history which are passed down through memorization. And this is well known. Okay, it's not just known in Christian circles. This is well known. People who study those times, they know this is how they pass down. Not just the Hebrew or the Jews. Every other group does the same. They pass it down through memorization. What do they pass down? Their genealogy. Who beget who? The family, the genealogy, very important. Some of you go back to your home village in China, right? And you find your genealogy book? I don't know. Okay, sorry. Now, I know this. I know that at the time when my grandfather was the patriarch of our family, if someone is born, you write letter to tell them this is the name of the child. Then write in the book. Personally, I've not seen that book, but you know what I mean? Genealogies are very important. You know, the old Bibles have pages that says who was born when, and etc., and who was baptized when. You're like crazy. Why waste paper on this? You see, because we no longer treasure where we come from and the traditions of our family. It's a great pity. Genealogies were very important. People know their genealogy. They are memorized. The next thing, the hero stories, because these are things that inspire the community. These two aspects. People who study how these things are passed down, they say that is how it's done. And the same for the Hebrew children. The same for the covenant people. They also use the same methods. Like now, if you do a research in science, in A-star, whatever, you do a research for a theological paper, you basically use the same methods, which is considered rigorous, which is considered, proper. But you, of course, you use different sources, etc. You may use a different language. The same thing. And you see that Genesis is almost entirely composed of genealogies, yes, and hero stories, right? You're going to meet the four heroes later on. Of course, you know who they are. You get what I mean? Same. Remembering these things, passing it down, recording it. And so Moses, 300 years after the ending of the last event in Genesis, he can record these things. Because these things are passed down by word of mouth, by oral history. Plus, he has reference to all these preserved forms of history written in, this is Sumerian. Sumeria is where the, above the Gulf of Persia, writings like this, he had access. So I'm trying to tell you that there is a process. Why? We have to appreciate God, what God has given us. We have to appreciate that we can have this record in our hands, authentic, historical, and that it can stand up to scrutiny. You can ask questions of it. Of course, not the wrong kind of questions. You ask the wrong kind of questions, you won't get the answer. You look at a recipe, then you say, how is flour made? Hello, you go and talk to your chef, how is flour made? Get out of my kitchen. That is not the question to ask him, you understand? You can ask a scientist or a chemist. So you don't ask the wrong kind of question of the text, you will get the answers. So this is the book of Genesis. However, in the book of Genesis, there are what we call, here and there, post-Mosaic elements. Post-Mosaic elements means that it cannot be that this is the name of the place during the time of Genesis. Okay, give you an example. Supposing we record the history of Singapore, which I'm sure next year, is it this year? Sorry. 9. to this year, the 200th year of our so-called founding by Raffles, there will be a lot of history going back to that time, right? Going back to that time, certain place names, now if you put those as the place names, nobody now will know what you're talking about. You see, and the British were there, and then they had a naval base at Nee-Soon, Neesoon. How? We put Nee-Soon and put Yishun. You understand? You put Nee-Soon, people are like, where is that? You put Yishun, then you put Yishun, somebody said, there's no Yishun at that time. What's your answer? Your answer is hello. I still got to make this thing accessible and understandable to the current generation. Is that right? The boys in Nee-Soon and all that, nobody knows. You get the point? Some of these place names in the book of Genesis and other parts of the Pentateuch, they have been changed. And certain things there reflect currently what people know, whether that they are kings. In those days, Genesis time, there were no kings at that time. There was no territory. Raffles time, right, West Malaysia, what we're talking about? The Federation of States, you understand? So some things are like that. And these are what we call the editorial revisions. In other words, after Moses wrote, somebody, an editor, revises some of these things so that the people who are reading at that time can understand. So that should not cause a major problem. All right, genre. What kind of literature? Again, you say, no need, why do we need to bother? The kind of literature we are dealing with affects our interpretation. Okay? So, I'm always puzzled. Somebody tells me, it's because you don't understand art. You don't understand, you don't know how to interpret. So I have to say, yes, that's true. You go and see a piece of art installation. Then you pay money, then you go line up, then you go in there, hey, look at the installation. So I saw this installation of a drain cover, then they put one big yellow box, do not cross this line, they put one drain cover in the center. Then I'm like, wow, what's this? Have you seen that? Sometimes put one ladder, sometimes put one painting, not painting, just hang on the wall, all black. I'm like, I could have done that. I used to do that because when I make mistake on the canvas, I just paint all black. It shows my ignorance, you understand? How do you interpret that, a drain cover? The person gave me an explanation that really floored me. It's so awesome. This drain is some aspect of life. You're covering up. And all kinds of things. It's like, oh, wow. The point is this. You must understand what genre is this. What type, what kind. Because it affects the interpretation. If you are reading poetry, you are supposed to interpret in a certain way. If you're reading history, you're supposed to interpret in a certain way. And you mustn't switch them around. That's why I say I stick to 12 to 50, to give Dr. Sedgwick room to say whatever he wants to say about 1 to 11. What kind of literature is that? Because my position is the same. It's not first 11 chapters, one kind, second 12 to 50, another kind. It's the same kind. And of course, 1 to 11, it's not science. Definitely not science. At least not the science that we know. Right? Many things we know now, how the ancients don't know. When you start talking about that, I think the ancients are what? Really aliens. So it cannot be. My point is this, we have to know what it is, then we know how to interpret. Genesis is what we call prose narrative. Prose is like prosaic, ordinary. Yeah. Ordinary, okay? Prose is ordinary writing. Most of the time we are writing prose, except in SMSs, etc. Then we are writing in emoticons and I don't know what else, and short forms that most of the time those who are not in it don't understand. We write prose. Ordinary writing, it doesn't contain rhythmic features, it's not poetry. And narrative is just story, it's a more high-class name for story. So I say, let me narrate to you what happened yesterday. Your child may tell you this. You're like, Mom, go to literature class now, so clever. I'd like to tell you what happened yesterday, right? So narrative. Narrative is just basically story. So Genesis is actually mainly writing, ordinary writing, which tells a story. And there are small bits of poetry interspersed throughout. But the important thing to remember is that it is more than prose narrative. It's more than just ordinary writing, telling stories. It's more than that. Because Genesis, I would maintain, and many would maintain, is history. Not myth or legend. Now, pause a while, reflect on this. It is very, very important. History and myth and legends, they are, I would say, worlds apart. You tell the history of your family. You don't tell the myths of your family. In the myths of your family, maybe your great-grandparents flew across the skies, something like that. Very, very different. I tell you this because at the time of Van Housen and his theory about the construction of Genesis from different sources, and that's why all these things don't agree, not consistent, at about the same time, there is this postulation that the things that happen in Genesis, etc., they are myths, they are legends. Therefore, you cannot believe them. Oh, then how come these people are still Christians? What do they believe? You can believe something about legends. Legends can still teach you lessons, isn't it? But there is a big difference between believing Genesis is history and Genesis is myth or legend. Some years back, I was in Bhutan. Bhutan, if you see Bhutan also, I love to go there, you always see this iconic picture of Bhutan. That is a temple, very grand temple, built into a cliff at very great height, 10,000 feet. So I asked my guide, we look at it, and I asked my guide, I said, how did you all build this temple? Because to me, this country is a simple, etc. How did this structure get built into the cliff at such a height? So I was thinking like, Swiss engineer, donations from Europe, who support? I was thinking along those lines, then he told me. He said, this monk, Rinpoche, flew to that spot on the back of a tiger from across the Himalayas, and then he built the temple. Then I said, next time you go to Bhutan, you ask them, okay? I don't know. Then I said, so I thought, okay, he's telling me the legend, right? So let me try to. I said, yeah, okay, I understand. But actually, how did people go up there? What do you all use? I was thinking of cranes and scaffoldings. And that's it. But tell me really, how did this temple get built? Then he said, this monk called Rinpoche sat on a tiger and flew across the Himalayas and built it. So I said, okay, if I ask him the third time, he will tell me the same thing. This is legend. He believed it earnestly. It is not a problem for him because to him, you see, our religion is so powerful. We have such a miraculous deed that put this temple there. We have such a monk whom we still look up to. You understand? That legend, not a problem. In Genesis, we are not talking about that kind of thing. Okay? We're not talking about it. We are not the Genesis, the Pentateuch, the crossing the Red Sea, etc. We're not talking about a legend or a myth. And say, what does it matter? It doesn't matter. I still know there. See, the story or the lesson is this. Actually, that was at the point of time when I was in the 70s. Theology was full of that. Everything being turned into legends and myths. Genesis is history. Then you say, okay, prove to me this history. Okay, we have only got time to tell you a little bit of why we call Genesis history. So in other words, Genesis is not just prose narrative, it is historical narrative. It's not Alice in Wonderland. It's not the Hobbits. It's not the trilogy of whatever, very brilliant stories. They learn a lot. Why else didn't people flock to watch the movie? There are lessons there, but it is historical narrative. It is story of history. Why? Because when you have a historical narrative, you must pay attention to all these things. I love history now. I should have studied when I was a student. But I can tell you I do very badly in history. Because I don't understand the method. Okay, I'm not schooled in the method. The method of history is that when you write history, you must pay attention to all these things. You must pay careful attention to chronology. Since it is history, there must be chronology. Which happened first? Why? And you see that Genesis is full of that. Even when they don't need to tell you, like, okay, skip that. They tell you exactly who stood there, who did what, who was, and what happened, part of historical narrative methodology. They locate the story in time and space. History happens in time and space. If you say Alice in Wonderland, where is Wonderland? People are like, you crazy. We don't care where Wonderland is. But can you ask a question like, where is the Garden of Eden? You may not be able to locate it, but you can ask such a question because if it's a historical event, it must happen somewhere. Where is the Garden of Eden? The Ark of Moses, where did it land? People are searching for it. Hey, please, Hobbit land, you don't go, there's Hobbit land now. They charge you a ton of money to go and see it, but that's not Hobbit land, you understand? You cannot ask such questions of myths and legends, it's silly. But people can ask, where did the Ark land? Mount Ararat, where is that, etc., etc., never mind. What I'm trying to say is that historical narrative, you can ask such questions. When, where? In historical narratives, the tracing of genealogy, very important. And especially the citing of sources. The citing of authentic sources, going as far back as you can. Very important. These are features of historical narratives. And now you come to appreciate, when you study Genesis below the background of the devotional lessons, etc., that you can learn, which are very important, you can see these features. They pop up at you. And you should not skip them. You should say, yes, historical narrative. Get the point? The organization of the book. How a book is organized is very important because if the author has done a careful job, the book should be properly organized. And not just properly organized, there must be some features of good literature in the book. I don't have time to show you many things about that. Although if you buy Bruce Waltke's book, you are going to see fantastic things about these features of the book, of how passages can be analyzed into passages that are nearly poetic in the way they are organized. I'll show you one later in the appendix. All right, answer this question. Genesis has how many chapters? 50, okay? 50 chapters. Exodus? 2 years from now, you know. Genesis has 50 chapters. Quite a lot. And when we approach a book, normally when you approach a book, people who are seriously looking for information, wanting to read something and get something, you turn to the contents page, isn't it? You look at the contents page, you scan. After you scan the contents page, in fact, you get an idea. You get an idea of the flow of thought of what the author is trying to achieve and how he's going to achieve all this. Of course, in mystery novels, you don't do that. The contents page is as mysterious as the story. Yeah? And if you're going to turn to the last page first and all that, then you spoil your whole. That is a killer of how to enjoy the book. The point is that most books, you turn to the contents page. If there's no contents page, then what do you do? Well, if there's no contents page, you're either stuck, then you read forward, read backwards, then you try to figure out things. Genesis is very unique. It's a wonderful book. When I start to look more into it, it's just fantastic. The care which the author took to build up this book is just fantastic. It has its own internal system of organization. Those are the markers, the book markers. And these book markers are not randomly chosen. Or let me use this. These book markers themselves are intrinsic to what the author is trying to say in the whole book. The trouble is that many of us don't look at these things as the book markers, as the pauses, a significant pause before the author moves to another aspect of the story. We don't. Skip that. And we missed out because of that. The book has its own internal system, and it's pretty obvious actually. The book is structured by headings which in Hebrew is called Toledot. Toledot. Toledot in Hebrew means generations or descendants. Okay? You will find that these Toledots, some say 10, some say 11, some say 12, depending on how you count, it doesn't matter. The point is this, the point is that these markers are very significant. And I guarantee 99% of us skip them. We should not skip them. They are very significant. Why? These are the markers that tell us how God is working out His salvation for the world. For the world. And that He is progressing. Nothing will stop Him. He is moving on. He is moving on. What are these? These are the Toledots. Okay? These are the Toledot headings in the book of Genesis. In our Bible, in the English, NIV, or whatever version you tend to use, you won't see the term Toledot. You will see the term, these are the genealogies. These are the generations. These are the descendants. That's what you'll see. The moment people see this, these are the genealogies, oh good, no need to read 10 verses. Skip. Okay, we're not going to skip. Because these are significant markers, as you can see how God is working out, I repeat, the salvation He has in mind for the world, which includes us. Okay? The first title of this we see is in chapter 2, verse 4. In 5, in 6, in 10, up to 11, these are the generations of Shem. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah after the flood. All right, the three sons of Noah after the flood. Shem, the ancestor of the Jews. Okay, and of course, the understanding is that in fact we also come from that line. The Chinese come from that line, from the line of Shem. The generations of Terah, the father of Abraham, even the generations of Ishmael, first son of Abraham, the chosen son, Isaac, these are the generations, these are the generations, these are the generations. All these are significance because we already said, in ancient people, they treasure genealogies. They treasure genealogy, where they come from. It tells them where they are going, who they are, what is their identity, how they live, etc. All these things are part of appreciating genealogies. These are the genealogies. These are the place markers. These are the book markers. These are the chapter markers. So the chapter markers that we have, they were created some centuries later by people to make our reading easier. But the Hebrew children of those days won't read it the way we read it. When they read, they will stop at these places. Because these are the, so to speak, the markers as intended by the author. You will discover later on, as we go through the rest of the seminar, that these are very important. Because what God is showing how He is working out His salvation, His blessings for everybody through the generations. Now, I want us to notice a few things about these titles. You will notice that story, genealogy, story, table, genealogy, story, they intersperse. It's very interesting. Because in some of these, after this heading, you have a story. And that's why you get lost. Not that we get lost. We skip all these things. Hey, genealogy, and we skip. then these things get blurred in our heads, and we don't appreciate some things because of all this skipping. When it says these are the genealogies of Adam, this is the Adam to Noah. There is a true genealogy. This one here, these are the generations of Terah. You expect a table of names? No, you get the story of Abraham. Okay, but these are the internal markers of how the story, how the narrative is evolving, and how it builds up to a climax, how it has ups and downs, but despite ups and downs, God and His purposes move on. All right, so notice these things about the organization of the book. Some are quite trivial, I would say, not so important, but I put them in for completeness, and that is that except in 5:1, the phrasing of these titles exactly the same. Exactly the same, except for 5. This is the Hebrew phrasing. And if the English translations do the translation in the right spirit, they should use exactly the same phrasing. And exactly the same phrasing always has an impact on the audience. To tell you have arrived here, it's just like if you run marathons, the markers on the road that tell you 14K, 15K, you think what's only one cartoon bigger? No. You are looking for these things, isn't it? I've arrived here, I've arrived there. So they all must be the same. No. You know what I'm trying to say? All these little things, they have meaning. Exactly the same phrasing. So that when you come here, you know you have arrived somewhere. God's purposes are being achieved. It moves on through the stories, through the genealogies. The point to note about all this is that the person named in the title is the senior figure of the story. That's why these are the genealogies of Terah. He is the senior person, but the stories are not always about him. The stories are about somebody or people in his family. This is clearest in the case of Isaac. So let's go back to this. It says that chapter 25, verse 19, these are the generations of Isaac. Then you read on. The story there is about Jacob and Esau. All right? Not about Isaac, although Isaac is there. Right? Sorry. Isaac is alive. All these stories about the conflicts between Jacob and Esau, the deceit of Jacob, on and on for nearly 11 chapters. Isaac is there, right throughout. But he's hardly mentioned. But the title, the place marker says these are the genealogies of Isaac. Similarly, the last section of the Bible, which is about Joseph, the title is These Are the Generations of Jacob. But it's not about Jacob. Jacob's story already told. These are generations. What follows is the main drama is about his sons. And in particular, Joseph. And it is amazing. Joseph has 14 chapters out of 50. It's a very, very long story. Okay, let's move on. I got to go faster. Right, this one I'll go quite fast because it's basically a summary, and you can slowly go line by line. The organization, usually Genesis will be divided into two sections. This section and this section, and we are covering this section. Yeah. We should cover this one first. But these are the logistics of heavy human schedules. So anyway, we cover this part first. And this part, there are 4 main events, chapters 1 to 11. Chapters 12 to 15, which will be the text for the sermons this year, this part, 4 main characters. It's very interesting. There's this symmetry here, which I find amazing for people like me who love symmetry. This symmetry, 4 main events, 4 main characters. The thing to appreciate is that this part covers more than 2,000 years, depending on what you believe about the age of the earth. That one, you can ask Professor Sedgwick, but I would say definitely more than 2,000 years. Covers huge sweep of people and nations. This one, it zooms in, it's like this satellite picture of the whole earth or universe and zooms in to one family. And then it covers, in the biggest chunk of the book, the 4 characters in the family. Okay? So when you want to take a very big bird's eye view, huge bird's eye view of Genesis, then this is the picture you bear in mind. All right, this part is very important. We are on schedule. I go a little bit until we stop at 10:30 or maybe 10:37 or 10:35, go for a break. Okay? The theme and its unfolding. By the time the sermons come on, some of these things will be very hidden, very buried, and we don't see it. So as I said at the beginning, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get us to appreciate not just Genesis in terms of some stories about some individuals who are known as the patriarchs, but I'm getting us to appreciate the theme, beginning, and how God continues that same theme up to today. Okay? So let's put together some of the elements of this theme. The theme of Genesis, and in fact the theme of Genesis is the theme of the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. It's in Genesis chapter 12 verses 1 to 3, call of Abraham. The call of Abraham, go from your country to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. All the families of the earth includes us. Abraham 2000 up to now, 4,000 years later, all the families of the earth shall be blessed, includes us. This is a very important covenant. So God promises Abraham 4 things. A land to live in, to the land that I will show you, a land to live in. Numerous descendants, I will make of you a great nation. Blessing, I will bless you. We'll analyze this a little bit afterwards. And blessing through him for all the families of the world. So we are inheritors of that same covenant. And we are also thinking, then how do we move that covenant forward? That's why our theme is blessed, blessed as part of this covenant to be a blessing. Is the covenant going to stop with us? Of course it won't stop, because this is God's work. If not you, somebody else. But the point is, are you going to be part of that covenant? This is the place that we are at. The important thing is this. Note, the promises of land, descendants, personal blessing, they are steps to the final goal, universal blessing. This is the heart of God. The heart of God is universal blessing. Once you understand this, it should warm your heart, to know that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, even the little thing, whatever is considered to you, are you so mundane, so monotonous, you can bless people with it. You are part of that covenant. Get the point? It's very, very important. So the final goal of universal blessing. Some people, and people have asked me now and then, sometimes at some point of crisis in their life, what's the purpose of my life? I'm always stunned. I'm like, at what level should I answer this question? What is the purpose of my life? What's God's mission for me? God's mission for you to be a blessing. To be a blessing. If by your coming here, you bless yourself and you bless others in some way, maybe not even directly connected with teaching Genesis, you are propagating this covenant with Abraham, of which we have inherited. How are these promises fulfilled? So my purpose now is to demonstrate to you that these promises are very clear. How were they fulfilled? In what ways? To what extent? In the book of Genesis. Because whereas we look at Genesis in terms of all these beginnings, which are very hard to understand, these stories about people, etc., in fact, the book of Genesis is about how that promise and how that covenant is fulfilled. But it's very hidden. So let me take each aspect of the 4 promises and elaborate. Firstly, the promise of descendants. After God promised the descendants, that promise bumped up against problems which, even if you don't know what issues surround infertility, etc., you say, how can that be? And that will teach you lessons about how God works. The promise of descendants. Hello, Sarah, wife, the matriarchs, the three famous matriarchs. Sarah, wife of Abraham. Rebecca, wife of Isaac. Rachel, one of the wives of Jacob, the favorite wife. They had two things in common. You may be hungry, but you must tell me, what are the two things they had in common? Huh? Food. Yeah. Yes, they had plenty food because they came from wealthy families. But no, I need Bible reference for that. You have to give me the verse. What two things that they have in common? They are beautiful. You got Bible reference? There are Bible references for that. They are beautiful. Number two, they were barren. Okay? They had problems conceiving. Never mind whose fault. But they could not bear children. Yeah, in the old days, they always blame the woman, Three of them were beautiful, not because we say so or that we look at all these pictures that they paint. No, the Bible says they are beautiful. You see me at break, I give you the references. And all three had difficulties conceiving. This bumps up against God's promise. You understand? Sometimes when you say God will bless me, I look at my situation, why everything is contrary to what God said. Because how can that be? This is what really our faith, our reliance on God, our hope in God, these are the lessons that we learn. Because the promise of descendant bumped up against this straight away. Now I'm going to go a bit faster because these are things that we know. See how old the couple was, Abraham and Sarah, when the baby was born? Sarah bore Isaac at 90 years of age. Even given the longevity of people of ancient days, this is still very, very old. Okay? The Bible tells us God opened her womb. God can fulfill his plans against all odds. So PSLE results so poor, didn't get any of my schools, finished. Hey, hello. Talk to people who never got any of their choices either, including me. God can fulfill his plans, whatever those plans are, and not just success or material things in life. God can fulfill his plans. He wants to show you this is his working. So we cannot go and claim, and cannot have pride, etc., etc. In self-protection, before the child was born, Abraham lied that Sarah was his sister. Actually, it's a half lie, because Sarah was his half-sister. But the spirit in which he lied, not correct. And he put Sarah in jeopardy, but God intervened. God saves us from some of our worst follies. God fulfills his plans despite human feelings. Our dawdling, our sitting around, twiddling, and God is patient. I'm not saying do that, test God, try God to realize all these aspects of God. No, but what I'm saying is that we really don't know enough of how big God is and what he can do. That is the point. So the first thing, the promise of descendants, bumped up against big problems. The promise of land, worse, slower in being fulfilled. You see, all these are underlying genesis, but we don't see it. We just don't see it, because what is it got to do with the life that we're going to learn all these major lessons? So I want to point out to you, very important. The promise of land, very slow in being fulfilled. Abraham, we are told, acquired a well. To acquire a well there is very, very important. Without water, you're not going to survive. If you can get a well for your own use, well, you can assure the survival of your family, like getting HDB flat or something. Acquire a well. Then later on, he bought a burial plot. When Sarah, to bury Sarah, it was the place called Machpelah is in Hebron. You mean there are such details? You see, we have skipped those details. Very important. Every acquisition of land, God promised them land. By the way, if you go to Israel, I think you can hardly go to visit Hebron. Okay? Because Hebron is in the Palestinian territory, so it's very hard to go and visit. At any rate, this is standing there, you know, now they make everything that is a sacred site into a big, big structure, etc., etc. Okay, it's quite hard. Bethlehem, by the way, is the same. They're all in Palestinian territory, harder to visit, not impossible. All right, let's show you a picture. A historical site, I mean, it's not all myth and legend, you cannot ask where and things like that. Right. Jacob bought some land near Shechem. All that was all that they had when the family emigrated to Egypt to escape the famine. They had this little well, this plot of burial land. They had a little bit, that's all they had. And God said, I will give you land. That's all they had when they went to Egypt. In Egypt, they were given a place to stay, but they could hardly say, this is our land. They don't have the title deeds to the land. By the time they left Egypt 400 years later, they were numerous. The descendant bit, you can say, has been achieved. Because numbers tell us they numbered 600,000 fighting men. If you count the men, you can easily add 2 more for total population, right? 1 woman, 1 child perhaps. So you can easily say, wow, big number. But they were landless. So what happened to the land? When is God going to fulfill his promise of the land? Genesis 15 verse 16 gives us the reason for God's so-called delay. What is the delay? The delay because there were Canaanites, particularly the Amorites, occupying the land. Can someone read me that verse? At my Bible, but...
In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sins of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
Right, thank you. The delay is because the sins of the Amorites have not reached their full measure. It's a difficult verse to understand. Basically, God is patient, God is waiting, graciously waiting for the Amorites to repent. When the sins of the Amorites reach their full measure, as wicked as they can be, then when the people enter the land, the process of annihilation on this and that, which continue to be huge issues in our study of the Old Testament, then it happened. There are many moving parts in God's purposes. We only see one part. Our part is, why isn't my part moving? Your part not moving because God is moving other parts first, understand? Waiting for other parts to move first. I don't care. You get what I mean? I'm just opening up our mind. So the delay was a very long time. And of course now they are in the land. The land is being encroached. There are lots of arguments about all the land, etc. But this is part of the history. Continue the theme and its unfolding. The promise of blessing to the patriarchs. Later on, I will cover this in the last few slides about the blessing. In Old Testament, this blessing here is the blessing that has got much to do with material blessing. I'll tell you a little bit about the New Testament thinking about blessing. Not quite the same. They are all different words, and they're translated differently also to make the differentiation. But in English, we don't make the differentiation, so we lump them together, we get confused in our mind. In the Old Testament, this blessing is a blessing of success in life, of material, of wealth, etc., etc. And definitely the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, they were wealthy people. God bless them. Even Jacob, he ran away from home to escape his brother's wrath with only his shirt on his back. He came back, my goodness. He brought so many wives, so many children. And that is one of the chief blessings in Old Testament days, to have not the so many wives, but the so many children. Serious, you can study a topic called polygamy in Old Testament. And you will not see a single word where God said this is right. It was a cultural practice, no doubt. But, okay, that's a separate topic. At any rate, Jacob came back with a lot. That is part of the blessing. God said, I will bless you. And that blessing in the Old Testament, the connotation is that people must see with their eyes, this is the blessing that God has blessed you with. Okay? By the way, we will use this term, and this is the meaning of the term, no? The patriarch. Unless some of you may not know that. This one, the promise of blessing through Abraham and his descendants to all the families of the earth. How? Did it happen in Genesis? In Genesis, we can say yes, to some extent. The closest fulfillment is when Joseph went into Egypt, rose to that position after many tribulations, rose to his position of being put in charge of all the administration in Egypt, and he, during the 7 years of plenty, stored up enough to save the whole population of Egypt and his own family, and perhaps even sell some to the neighboring countries. So this was a big blessing for him to bless people and in his family. Later on, of course, Israel is not seen as a blessing. In fact, Israel was used like scourge of God, like the people to punish many others for their sins, etc. They're not seen as a blessing. As they take up the land in Canaan, they were basically seen as a threat. But the ultimate fulfillment of this blessing is Jesus, descendant of Abraham, through you, Jesus, bringing to us that ultimate fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. Through Jesus, if you come to know Jesus, you will be blessed. You see? So you see this big flow of how God used one man and how that blessing continues. Okay, 10:30. 2, we have a break. I leave Danny to tell you what time you come back and where you go for your break.